Oyster farming has been a staple of the Rhode Island seafood industry since the earliest settlers. Today, Kyle Hess, the owner of Butter Brine Oysters, continues that tradition. Kyle's farm operates on Hog Island, located in the northern end of Narragansett Bay near Bristol. This spring we were lucky enough to sit down with Kyle and tour his farm, learning just what it takes to be an oyster farmer in the 21st century.
One of the most rewarding things that you can be told is that your oysters taste fantastic. Hi, I'm Kyle Hess, owner of Butter Brine Oysters, located at Hog Island in Narragansett Bay, and we've been farming oysters since 2013. Oysters are filter feeders, so they filter food out of the water column, and what they're trying to eat, or what they do eat, is plankton. And because oysters pump 50 gallons a day, they inherently pick up the characteristics of the water that can be unique to your exact location. And so what happens is, a farm can be a mile away from another farm, and yet the oysters taste different than those. And that's great, because now you've got this selection of all these different oysters, all these different farms throughout Rhode Island, and they all taste different. And so as a consumer, when you go into an oyster bar or a restaurant that has oysters, you can try different ones out, and you can pick up a huge taste difference from one to the other. And so that just gives the consumer so much more options, and it's led to this, in a lot of ways we consider ourselves a boutique fishery. The farm is located in a shallow cove on the west side of the island. It's shallow enough where it's difficult to get in and out, and your selection of boat, or the boat type, is very important. It has to be a shallow draft boat. So what we use is a simple skiff. Basically, these boats are just wide open, very utilitarian, but they are shallow draft, so they can maneuver through shallow water without hitting bottom. And the farm itself is a 5-acre square located right in the middle of this cove. And we utilize a combination of intertidal and floating gear to rear the oysters all the way from seed all the way up to market size.
Kyle raises his oysters for about 2 years, or until they reach the market size of 3 inches. In the winter, when plankton no longer populate the water column, the oysters close up tightly and stop filtering, entering a hibernation-like state. In the spring, when the water temperatures warm, the oysters reopen and continue to feed. This process continues until the oysters are harvested and sorted before being sent off to local restaurants. Kyle's farm produces about 500,000 oysters, each of them filtering as many as 50 gallons of water per day. This filtering has been a proven method for increasing water quality and decreasing pollutants in the water column.
And so the site is divided into 2 sections. One is intertidal, and that means that the gear resides in between low tide and high tide. So when the tide goes out and it's low tide, the gear is suspended out of the water completely. And when the tide comes in, the gear is completely submerged by water, and you can't even see it at all. So these flip bags, they're called, and these bags have a float on one side, and every tide cycle they float and then fall, and float and fall, and so they flip. And so these are intertidal, and I raise my animals from seed in those until they reach a certain size, 2 inch. And then they leave those and go to the floating cages. And that takes up the majority of the space on the farm. These are floating cages. These are called oyster grow. So these are floating cages that are connected in series with each other to form long strings. And inside the cages are 6 individual bags called grow-out bags. And this is a plastic mesh, semi-rigid shape. It forms a 3-dimensional structure that the oysters are sitting in. And what's great about these grow-out bags is water flows straight through them. Every tide, the water flows right through them. So the oyster gets to just sit in this protected little structure and feed on the nutrients in the water. So these are floating cages, and obviously it denotes exactly that. The cages are floating at the surface of the water, so you can actually see them. It keeps them off the bottom, which is good to stay away from predators. And the top foot or couple feet of the water column is where the most of the nutrients are. The sunlight is the most active right up at the surface. All kinds of activity are happening there, and that's where most of the food is. So if you can position the oysters in that food layer, they'll obviously get the most food, they'll perform the best, etc. So that's what these cages do. They float, and that's what separates my farm from other farms. Most farms are bottom farms, meaning the gear sits on the bottom, and it just sits there all the time. And when you need to, they would pull the cages up to work on them. Mine float, and so you can just drive right up to them and grab the stuff out. So that works well.
Unfortunately, Kyle's livelihood is facing a new challenge: public perception and the issue of outward appearance. Because of this, oyster farms are struggling to maintain their stake in the community, an issue that some farmers believe is short-sighted, as their farms benefit the environment, the local economy, and provide a fresh source of food, all while leaving the water in a cleaner condition from when they began.
What I wish people knew about oyster farming is that it's providing an efficient and eco-friendly way of producing protein. It's providing many jobs to people throughout the community, and it's also a really effective way of cleaning the water, and is a massive barrier against harmful algal blooms. And I feel like we're at a time now where there are people who are not pro oyster aquaculture. And that's because people don't like the looks of it. People think that it's in their way, and they wish that maybe there were no oyster farms. And I just wish people could understand, or do understand, that they provide a huge role in providing positive effects to the environment. And my farm is no different. And so, I like to be thought of as helping improve the environment.
For more information about butter and brine oysters, please visit the Chesapeake Island Oyster Company page located at rioystertrail.com. Or to learn more about oyster farming in your area, head down to your local oyster bar and try out their selection of fresh, local oysters.